Hear that sweet, relaxing music? Doesn't that make you want to get up, grab your tools, and revive a farm? No? Well, you're no fun. If you're unfamiliar with this, let it be known that these songs and little pixelated guys are heavily considered the beloved mother of cozy games that started it all. Harvest Moon. Oh, wait. Story of Seasons. No, I actually meant Bokujo Monogatari. Yeah, you know what? Never mind. How did we get to this point? What happened to Harvest Moon? With the newest Story of Seasons, The Grand Bazaar, now out, we thought we'd take a look back at this topic and figure out what actually went down. Grab your tools because we're about to do some digging. Spring to New Beginnings. Harvest Moon is a farm and life simulation role-playing video game developed first by Amicus for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES. It was first released in Japan in 1996, where it was known as Bokujo Monogatari, translated as Farm Story in English. It was then released in North America by Natsume in 1997 and in Europe in 1998. Yasuhiro Wada, the series creator, drew his inspiration from his childhood in the countryside, where he wished to make a role-playing game without any combat. For those who weren't a big fan of blasting enemies with guns, stopping world-ending wars, fighting your way for a higher purpose, or those who just needed to take a breather from all that, Harvest Moon was exactly what they needed. Maybe it was the way you could grow any crops you like and then use them as ingredients to cook any meal. Maybe it was the way you could brush and pet your farm animals and they'd show you love back. Maybe it was the endearing town festivals and events that made this place feel so alive. Or maybe it was a certain broody handsome guy who has a temper, but I swear I could fix it. Oh, anyway. From then on, Harvest Moon had attracted a growing number of players on both consoles and handhelds over the years with its simplistic rural life. So, how does a game built on the simplicity and joys of life suddenly become messy? Summer. Things are heating up. Strap in and feel free to take notes because we're in for a bumpy ride. If you're a fan of the series and earlier titles, you might be familiar with this name and blue logo displayed every time you boot up the game. Natsume Inc. was the sole publisher of all Harvest Moon games from the beginning and has pretty much struck gold with the series since then throughout the years. So, a perk of this role and publishing deal meant that they would own the licensing and rights to the name Harvest Moon from here on out. Now we're going to backtrack a bit. Remember when we mentioned Harvest Moon was first released in 1996 by Amicus? Well, Amicus is a small game design team that had the game published in Japan through its parent company, Pac-In Video. Shortly after the release, Pac-In Video then merged with Victor Electronics, which meant that they became a part of their game studio, Victor Interactive Software, as well. It'll stay that way until 2003, after which they were acquired by Marvelous Entertainment and became Marvelous Interactive. Okay, now we're heading back to Natsume. I hope you're still with me. Natsume has actually two entities. Natsume Inc., in charge of publishing and localization in the Western space, and Natsume Co. Limited, the original Japanese division responsible for a few games such as Pocky and Rocky, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers The Fighting Edition, and more. As if this wasn't confusing enough, Natsume Co. Limited became Natsume Atari after merging with a pachinko company, and Natsume Inc. would also open their own studio in Japan called Natsume Inc. Japan. I swear this will make sense soon. In 2007, Marvelous Interactive acquired Xseed, which is a studio that localizes Japanese games for the American market. Despite the company behind the actual development of Harvest Moon becoming a much bigger entity than Natsume, they would still come to rely on Natsume for publishing in the coming years. Many aren't actually aware, myself included up until a few years ago, that Natsume has very little to do with the games outside of publishing and localization in North America and occasionally Europe. But that lack of experience didn't stop them from trying their hand at actual game development. In 2007 and 2009, Natsume themselves would put out two puzzle games, Though with Harvest Moon in the title, Marvelous would have no involvement whatsoever in the development of these games, despite it having the Harvest Moon title. Perhaps testing out the waters on how much they could get away with their license on the title. On the other hand, Marvelous was also cooking up their own games, specifically a new farming series that featured fantasy elements and RPG gameplay called Rune Factory. Despite Natsume playing around with the Harvest Moon IP, everything stays nice and dandy between the two companies, up until 2014 that is. Fall, the leaves have fallen. All things come and go, don't they? And for Natsume, after almost 2 decades, it was their time to go. Instead of having a middleman taking a cut of their profits, aka Natsume, Marvelous decided to have Xseed step up and now take on the role as their sole localizer and publisher. But if you remember, Natsume completely owns the name Harvest Moon, which means Marvelous had to take a leap of faith and abandon the Harvest Moon brand that has endeared itself to fans in the West for years at this point. Thus, Story of Seasons now takes the place of the beloved name Harvest Moon. And, essentially, that's it. That's the big change. The thing is, though, how can you make sure that the same audience, especially in the Western space, that has loved Harvest Moon for years, will be able to differentiate the two games? Heck, as a kid, it took me years to realize this change. There was even this whole period of my gaming life where I would just wonder, whatever happened to Harvest Moon? And I'm sure I wasn't the only one. Marvelous could have kept creating under the Harvest Moon name, but they took the risk anyway so they could be more in control of their IP. In 2014, they held an interview with the head of development at Marvelous, Yoshifumi Hashimoto, to explain the shift in hopes to reassure fans that the game is essentially still the same. Here, he even explained the differences and reasons for their separation. In the Japanese version, we don't have a title change of course, so it is more of a change for Harvest Moon fans. But Story of Seasons is a new IP, and as you said, there will be newcomers. So we're talking closely with the US side about how to make it more friendly for new players. For 18 years, it's been the same development team, so the game itself hasn't really changed in that sense. But Natsume is doing their own Harvest Moon now, because we sort of have a different way of looking at where Harvest Moon should go. That's where we departed from each other. So how did Natsume fare on their side of things? Though they no longer had the same development team that made Harvest Moon the name it was, that didn't stop Natsume from continuing to produce their own games under the Harvest Moon name. I mean, you have such a valuable brand, it'd be silly not to try and do something even if it's just a name. You see, the other non-farming gaming titles under their belt weren't really doing the best in terms of sales and popularity. A certain household name that everyone knows and loves on the other hand though. So, Natsume decided if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Winter, the cold is unforgiving. So now they both have gone their separate ways and have branched out to find their own path. We have Marvelous, who continues to produce the same game we've all grown up with, except with a shiny new coat of paint to its name. Meanwhile, Natsume is, well, I give them points for trying. Unfortunately, things weren't off to a great start, especially with their first game post-breakup. Yes, I'm calling this a breakup. Harvest Moon: The Lost Valley, receiving unfavorable reviews and becoming the lowest rated Harvest Moon game at that time. Though still bearing the same beloved name, the change was apparent to the many longtime fans. They were not pleased with the jarring differences such as a new Minecraft-esque terraforming, and the original game seemed to have lost all the charm it once had. That outcome seems obvious to us since most of the people who made Harvest Moon the beloved game it was were back at Marvelous, working on Story of Seasons. Harvest Moon these days is basically just that, a name. As much as I'd like to say things get better for Natsume from here on out, it sadly doesn't. It doesn't help sales either that they don't release their games in Japan, since the new Story of Seasons game still had the rights to the name Bokujo Monogatari. This leads to a long winding road over the years of okay-ish sequels that get less praise as the series goes on. And as the years pass, the fans grow older and wiser to the story of Seasons and Harvest Moon's split situation, much like us when we eventually found out about it. And so, the fans would move on to greener pastures, back to where the original developers hail. Story of Seasons is a whole different story, if you know what I mean. The following sequels on their end do fairly well, retaining and building upon the many elements of the original game that keeps things interesting for both dedicated players and newcomers alike. And on that note, it seems that they both just had different wants and needs. Marvelous wanted to keep using the tried and true formula, while Natsume felt like mixing things up. Damn, breakups can be cold. Spring, it's okay to begin again. Despite the confusing restructuring and rebranding, as well as the more or less okay sequels that have definitely ruffled some feathers among longtime fans, it's hard to deny that Harvest Moon, now Story of Seasons, has made a large impact on the cozy gaming scene and farming sims. These days, there are so many indie games coming out that are part of the genre that Harvest Moon / Story of Seasons pioneered. We got Fields of Mysteria, Coral Island, Sun Haven, and of course, we can't forget the biggest farming sim indie game, Stardew Valley. It is a whole love letter to the game itself, gaining massive success, even surpassing the long-standing series that inspired it, with over 41 million copies sold as of December 2024. As a fellow huge fan of the series, this has been an eye-opener to see how far the series has come considering all the changes they have gone through. Even after digging through all this complex history, the simplicity and serene joyful moments of Harvest Moon will forever be ingrained in my childhood, which I carry with me in my adulthood today. Especially as an adult, things suddenly go by so fast. Life gets complicated and tough, but Harvest Moon will always serve as a reminder that you gotta take time to step back, breathe, and enjoy the little things. I'm honestly glad to see that the developers are still developing and iterating on the game that made a significant part of my childhood, especially with the recent release of Story of Seasons Grand Bazaar. Oh, we just put out a review of it on our channel? Why not check out our thoughts on it? When and how did you find out about the Harvest Moon / Story of Seasons situation? What's your favorite entry in the series? Feel free as well to like the video and subscribe to us if you're looking for more gaming content like this. This has been Game8 and thanks for watching.